There's a difference between doing your job and owning your mission, between completing tasks and creating meaning, between being a worker and being a leader. Thinking like a leader doesn't require a title, a corner office, or a fancy business card. It requires perspective, a mindset, a way of looking at the world that transforms ordinary effort into extraordinary impact. Most people spend their lives following instructions. They clock in, do what's expected, and go home. They measure their day by what they've completed, not by what they've contributed. And that's fine until you realize that progress doesn't come from those who simply follow the rules. It comes from those who understand the reason behind them. Leaders think differently. They don't just ask, what do I need to do? They ask, why does it matter? Because when you understand the why, the what becomes more meaningful. When you see the purpose, you find energy in the mundane. That's what separates those who work to survive from those who work to create something that outlasts them. Think about the people who inspire you, the ones who seem to move others effortlessly. They're not necessarily smarter, more talented, or even more experienced. But they see the world differently. When others see a list of tasks, they see a vision taking shape. When others are waiting for direction, they're already moving toward possibility. Leaders don't wait for permission to care. They don't wait for someone to tell them what's wrong before they fix it. They don't wait for a crisis to take action. They step forward because they see ownership as a responsibility, not a reward. There's a story I love about two bricklayers. When asked what they're doing, the first one says, I'm laying bricks. The second says, I'm building a cathedral. Both are doing the same task, but one is a worker while the other is a leader in spirit. The worker sees the job, the leader sees the purpose. And that difference changes everything from how you show up to how others follow you. If you only think like a worker, your mindset is limited by your job description. But if you think like a leader, your impact becomes limitless. Because leadership isn't about authority, it's about influence. It's about the way you make people feel, the example you set, and the courage you show when things aren't certain. Leaders see beyond the task, they see the purpose. They understand that even the smallest job has meaning if it contributes to something larger. A leader flipping burgers might be building a culture of teamwork. A leader answering phones might be shaping a customer's first impression of the company. Leadership begins when you connect your effort to a purpose bigger than yourself. And that brings us to something crucial: ownership over obedience. Workers wait for instructions. Leaders take initiative. A worker says, that's not my job. A leader says, how can I help? Leadership thinking isn't about following every rule. It's about taking responsibility for the result. It's about caring enough to improve the process, even when no one's watching. When you think like a worker, you protect your comfort. When you think like a leader, you protect your standards. You refuse to cut corners, not because someone told you not to, but because it violates your own values. That's ownership. And ownership doesn't mean perfection, it means accountability. It means being the one who raises your hand when something goes wrong and says, that's on me, let's fix it. The people who take ownership create trust, and trust is the currency of leadership. But thinking like a leader also means playing the long game. Workers focus on getting through the day, leaders focus on building the future. It's easy to prioritize what's urgent over what's important. It's easy to seek short-term comfort instead of long-term growth. But leaders know that growth rarely feels good in the moment. It's uncomfortable, it's inconvenient, it demands sacrifice. The worker asks, what do I get out of this? The leader asks, what will this create in the long run? That simple shift in thinking determines whether you're reacting to life or shaping it. Leaders understand that the hardest days often define the strongest people. They embrace challenges as opportunities to refine their vision, not reasons to abandon it. They know that progress is built on patience, the kind of patience that says, this might take time, but it will be worth it. And perhaps the most misunderstood part of leadership is this: you don't need authority to lead. Influence doesn't come from a title, it comes from trust. The best leaders are often found in the middle of the team, not at the top. They lead through example, through consistency, through empathy. When you think like a leader, you focus less on controlling people and more on inspiring them. You stop demanding compliance and start earning commitment. You realize people follow those who make them feel seen, valued, and capable. A worker says, "I'll do what I'm told." A leader says, "I'll do what's right." That takes courage. It's easier to blend in, to stay silent, to follow the crowd. But leadership thinking asks you to stand out, to be the person who raises the uncomfortable question, who challenges the easy answer, who reminds everyone what matters most. You see, leadership isn't about always being right, it's about being real. It's about showing up with integrity, admitting mistakes, and choosing growth over ego. Workers seek approval. Leaders seek progress. The worker's question is, will they like it? The leader's question is, will this make us better? And that's the pivot point of every great organization, every great movement, every great life. Because progress isn't about pleasing people, it's about pushing boundaries. When you think like a leader, you stop chasing recognition and start chasing results. You care less about being noticed and more about being useful. You measure your day not by how many things you checked off your list, but by how much you move the needle for those around you. And the truth is, anyone can make this shift. It's not about age, status, or experience. It's about mindset. The moment you start asking why instead of just what, the moment you take ownership instead of waiting for permission, the moment you focus on impact instead of instruction, you become a leader. Leadership is a choice. Every day, in every meeting, on every project, you have a choice to think like a worker or think like a leader. The worker asks, "What's expected of me?" The leader asks, "What's possible here?" When you start thinking like a leader, your work stops being about survival and starts being about significance. You begin to see the ripple effect of your actions. You realize that how you show up affects how others show up. You become the example others want to follow, not because you're perfect, but because you care. The real power of leadership is service. It's not about having people work for you, it's about working for them. A leader looks at the team and asks, "What do they need from me to be their best?" The worker asks, "What do I need to do to keep my job?" That's the difference between existing in the system and elevating it. When you think like a leader, you create culture. You set standards by how you behave, not by what you say. You remind people that purpose is contagious. You make excellence the expectation, not the exception. And maybe the most beautiful part of leadership is that it multiplies. When one person starts thinking like a leader, others begin to do the same. It creates a chain reaction of trust, initiative, and vision. A team of workers gets things done. But a team of leaders, they change the world. So, if you want to make an impact, don't wait for the promotion, don't wait for the recognition, and don't wait for the perfect moment. Start thinking differently. Ask the harder questions. Take ownership where others make excuses. Lead where others hesitate. Because the world doesn't need more workers. It needs more leaders, people who see beyond the checklist, who act with purpose, and who care enough to create change. Every day you have the chance to show up as either a worker or a leader. Choose to see meaning. Choose to take ownership. Choose to think long-term. Choose to influence with integrity. Choose growth over approval. That's how transformation happens, not in grand gestures, but in small, consistent choices to lead, not follow. So think like a leader, not a worker. Because when you change the way you think, you change the way you work. And when you change the way you work, you change the world. There's a quiet difference between those who simply work and those who lead. You can see it in how they show up, how they speak, how they make others feel. It's not in the title on their door or the number of people reporting to them. It's in the way they think. To think like a leader means to see beyond the immediate, to look past the checklist and into the impact. It means understanding that leadership is not about having power, but about taking responsibility. Most people are taught to think like workers. Do your job, follow the plan, stay in your lane. But progress has never come from people who only did what they were told. Progress comes from those who see what's missing and choose to create it. There's a moment in every career where you realize that effort alone isn't enough. You can work hard, follow every rule, and still feel stuck. That's because workers think in terms of execution, leaders think in terms of evolution. The worker asks, "What do I need to do today?" The leader asks, "What are we trying to build over time?" The mindset shift begins when you stop looking at your job as a list of tasks and start viewing it as an opportunity to contribute to something larger. When you think like a worker, you see yourself as a small part of a machine. When you think like a leader, you see yourself as a vital part of a movement. That change in thinking transforms not only your results, but also your sense of meaning. Leaders are driven by purpose. Workers are driven by direction. The worker waits for someone to say, here's what you need to do. The leader says, here's what we can make better. The difference isn't knowledge or skill, it's initiative. It's the courage to act without waiting to be asked. In every organization, there are people who don't have leadership titles but carry leadership energy. They're the ones who make others feel valued, who ask deeper questions, who remind the group why they started in the first place. That's because true leadership is never assigned, it's earned. It comes from showing up differently. Workers often define success by completion. Did I finish what I was told to do? Did I meet the deadline? Leaders define success by contribution. Did this make things better? Did it bring us closer to our vision? That's the difference between being efficient and being effective. Efficiency keeps things moving. Effectiveness moves things forward. Leaders see the why behind the work. They connect the dots between daily effort and greater purpose. When you understand why you're doing something, you bring more energy, creativity, and care to it. You start to see even small tasks as part of a larger story. The truth is, the work itself doesn't change. What changes is how you see it. And once you see meaning, you can't unsee it. The greatest shift happens when ownership replaces obedience. Workers wait for approval, leaders act. With accountability. A worker will say, that's not my problem. A leader says, if it affects us, it's my responsibility. Ownership doesn't mean doing everything yourself, it means caring enough to ensure things get done right. It means being invested in the outcome, not just the assignment. Ownership builds trust. When people know you'll take responsibility rather than pass blame, they rely on you, they follow you. They listen when you speak. That's how influence begins, not through authority, but through consistency. Leadership isn't a speech or a strategy. It's a daily practice of showing up with integrity. And integrity is what allows leaders to see beyond themselves. Workers often focus on what they can get from the job, pay, praise, or promotion. Leaders focus on what they can give clarity, confidence, and courage. Leadership thinking is about adding value even when it's not expected. It's asking, what can I contribute instead of what's in it for me? But thinking like a leader also means learning to play the long game. Workers are motivated by the next paycheck or the next project. Leaders are motivated by the next generation. They make decisions not for applause today, but for sustainability tomorrow. They don't rush to prove they're right. They commit to doing what's right. It's easy to get caught up in short-term thinking. We want quick wins, immediate results, instant feedback. But leadership requires patience. It's about planting seeds you may never see grow. It's about believing that your effort will matter even if the results take time. A worker says, I just want to get through this week. A leader says, I want to make sure what we build this week still matters a year from now. That kind of thinking takes courage. It's much easier to settle for comfort than to pursue contribution. But the world doesn't change through comfort, it changes through commitment. Leaders are not focused on looking busy, they're focused on creating clarity, they're not obsessed with being right, they're committed to doing what's best. And most importantly, they understand that leadership is about people, not processes. You can't lead without empathy, you can't inspire without trust. You can't build anything meaningful if you only care about the outcome and not the people creating it. Workers manage tasks. Leaders nurture potential. Leaders see beyond what a person is capable of today and imagine who they could become tomorrow. They don't demand perfection, they cultivate growth. They understand that mistakes are not failures, they're feedback. That's why great leaders aren't afraid to be vulnerable. They admit when they don't know, when they need help, when they've made a mistake. Vulnerability isn't weakness, it's authenticity. It invites others to bring their full selves to the table. When a leader says, I don't have all the answers, they give permission for others to speak up, to share, to innovate. When you think like a leader, you stop worrying about being the smartest person in the room. Instead, you focus on bringing out the best in everyone else. Leadership is not about being in charge, it's about taking care of those in your charge. It's about creating an environment where people feel safe to experiment, to challenge, and to grow. And here's the beautiful thing. Leadership thinking is contagious. When one person on a team starts taking ownership, starts showing initiative, starts connecting actions to purpose, others begin to follow. It creates a culture shift from compliance to commitment, from fear to trust, from silence to collaboration. If you want to see the impact of leadership thinking, watch how it changes the energy in a room. Workers walk in with questions, what do we need to do today? Leaders walk in with conviction, here's what we're building together. That kind of energy lifts everyone. It transforms workplaces into communities and goals, into missions. The moment you start thinking like a leader, your work gains a new kind of weight. It's no longer about crossing things off your to-do list. It's about creating momentum for something that matters. You realize that your job isn't just a job, it's a platform to serve, to influence, to make things better for others. And maybe that's the essence of it all. Leaders serve. They don't demand loyalty. They earn it by giving it first. They don't ask for effort. They inspire it through their example. Leadership is not about being above others. It's about standing beside them, reminding them of the purpose that brought them together. When you think like a leader, you also learn to detach your ego from your role. You stop defining your worth by your position. Because leadership is not a status you achieve, it's a standard you uphold. It's about showing up in a way that makes others stronger, not smaller. Even in moments of uncertainty, leaders focus on what they can control, their attitude, their effort, their empathy. They understand that their behavior sets the tone for everyone around them. If they panic, others panic. If they remain calm, others find courage. Leadership thinking means recognizing that every action sends a message. And perhaps the hardest part of thinking like a leader is that it requires you to keep growing. Workers often stop once they feel competent. Leaders never stop learning. They stay curious. They ask questions. They seek feedback. They remain students of their own craft because they know growth doesn't happen by accident. It happens by intention. Every day, you have two choices: to think like a worker or to think like a leader. The worker says, I'll do what's asked. The leader says, I'll do what's needed. The worker says, it's not my fault. The leader says, it's my sixth responsibility. The worker says, I'll wait for direction. The leader says, I'll find the way. This mindset is not reserved for CEOs or managers. It's available to anyone who chooses it. The moment you start seeing purpose instead of tasks, responsibility instead of orders, and growth instead of comfort, you are thinking like a leader. So, wherever you are in an office, a classroom, a shop floor, or your own home, don't underestimate your ability to lead. You don't need permission to make things better. You don't need authority to have influence. All you need is the decision to see your work as a contribution, not just a requirement. Because the truth is, the world has enough workers. It needs more leaders, people who care enough to connect, to challenge, to create, people who see the potential in others and the purpose in themselves. Thinking like a leader means showing up differently every day, even when no one notices. It means believing that what you do matters, even when no one says thank you. It means having the courage to act with integrity, even when it costs you comfort. That's how change begins, not with grand gestures, but with quiet conviction, not with authority, but with example, not with position, but with purpose. So, wherever you are, whatever your role, choose to think like a leader, not a worker. Because when you do, your work becomes more than a task. It becomes a legacy. Leadership isn't a title you earn. It's a way you think, a way you see the world, a way you choose to show up when it matters most. Thinking like a leader isn't about being the loudest voice in the room or the one who has all the answers. It's about seeing beyond yourself, beyond your tasks, your goals, your comfort. It's about understanding that real impact begins when you stop asking what you can get and start asking what you can give. Every workplace has two types of people. those who think like workers and those who think like leaders. Both may have the same role, the same responsibilities, even the same title, but their impact is completely different. The worker thinks in terms of my job. The leader thinks in terms of our mission. That difference in thinking transforms everything, not just the results, but the relationships, the culture, the trust. When you think like a worker, you're focused on doing things right. When you think like a leader, you're focused on doing the right things. That shift requires courage, because it's much easier to stay within the lines than to ask whether the lines themselves still make sense. It's safer to complete the checklist than to question if the checklist leads anywhere meaningful. Leaders don't just see what is, they see what could be. They look at the same situation as everyone else, but imagine a different future. They see possibility where others see limitation. That's what separates vision from routine. Workers wait for change to come from above. Leaders become the catalyst for change where they stand. There's a story about a janitor at NASA during the Apollo missions. When someone asked him what his job was, he replied, "I'm helping put a man on the moon." That's the mindset of a leader. His job didn't change, but his sense of purpose did. He didn't see himself as cleaning floors. He saw himself as part of something historic. That's what happens when you connect your work to a mission bigger than yourself. It transforms everything you do. Thinking like a leader means connecting dots others overlook. It means seeing the purpose behind the process. When you understand the why, the how becomes more powerful. Purpose gives effort meaning, and meaning fuels persistence, especially when things get difficult, because they always do. Workers often stop when things get hard. Leaders persist because they believe in something beyond the moment. They know that setbacks are not signals to stop, but invitations to grow stronger. Leaders aren't immune to fear. They simply refuse to let fear make their decisions for them. They ask, what's the right thing to do? Even when it's uncomfortable. Leadership thinking isn't about control, it's about responsibility. Workers think, it's not my problem. Leaders think, if it affects us, it's mine to help solve. That mindset creates ownership. Ownership builds trust. And trust creates the kind of environment where people feel safe to take risks, to contribute ideas, to be real. When people feel safe, they perform better. Not because they're told to, but because they want to. That's the power of leadership, thinking it transforms compliance into commitment. It's not about getting people to work harder. It's about giving them a reason to care. Leaders understand that the most important question they can ask isn't, what do I need to do? But why does this matter? The moment you start asking that question, your work shifts from being mechanical to being meaningful. You start to lead, even if no one calls you a leader. Leadership begins the moment you take initiative. It's when you stop waiting for direction and start finding ways to make things better. It's when you see something broken and decide to fix it, not because it's your job, but because it's the right thing to do. That's the essence of ownership, caring beyond obligation. The challenge is that thinking like a leader often means standing alone. It means raising your hand when something doesn't feel right, even if no one else does. It means choosing principles over popularity. Workers seek approval, leaders seek progress. Approval fades. Progress lasts. Leaders think long-term. Workers think about today's task. Leaders think about tomorrow's impact. They understand that building something meaningful takes time, patience, and consistency. They don't chase quick wins at the expense of lasting results. They play the infinite game, one focused not on beating others, but on making the mission stronger every day. This long-term thinking requires discipline because it's tempting to go for what's easy now instead of what's right later. It's tempting to protect your comfort instead of building your character. But leadership isn't about choosing what's convenient, it's about choosing what's worth it. The leader's mindset says this may not pay off immediately, but it will matter eventually. And that perspective changes how you handle adversity. Workers see problems as obstacles. Leaders see them as opportunities to learn, to adapt, to evolve. Leadership thinking transforms frustration into fuel. It takes failure, something most people avoid, and turns it into a stepping stone toward wisdom. Leaders also understand something crucial. You don't need authority to have influence. Influence comes from trust, and trust is earned through consistency. It's built when your words and actions align, when you show up the same way whether anyone's watching or not. People don't follow titles, they follow examples. When you think like a leader, you realize your job isn't just to perform, it's to inspire performance in others. It's to create an environment where others feel seen, supported, and capable. Leadership isn't about being in charge, it's about taking care of those in your charge. It's about making sure the people around you have the clarity and confidence to succeed. That's why emotional intelligence is the foundation of leadership. Workers manage tasks. Leaders manage emotions, their own and others. They know how to listen. They understand that sometimes people don't need solutions, they just need to feel heard. Leaders give people space to be human, and in doing so, they earn their trust. Leadership also means humility. The best leaders aren't the ones who think they know everything. They're the ones who are always learning. They stay curious. They ask questions. They listen more than they speak. A worker might say, I already know how to do this. A leader says, there's always something new to learn. That curiosity keeps them adaptable in a world that never stops changing. When you think like a leader, you realize that leadership isn't about recognition. It's not about credit or praise. It's about impact. The measure of your leadership isn't how many people report to you, it's how many people grow because of you. Sometimes that means your best work will go unnoticed. Sometimes it means doing what's right without getting credit for it. That's okay. Because leaders understand that the reward is in the result, not the recognition. It's in knowing that you made a difference, even if no one saw you do it. The mindset of a leader turns ordinary moments into meaningful ones. It changes how you handle pressure, how you respond to failure, how you treat others. It's the decision to rise above frustration and respond with intention. It's choosing empathy when it would be easier to judge. It's choosing growth when it would be easier to quit. The truth is, leadership isn't a one-time choice, it's a daily one. Every day, you decide whether you'll think like a worker or think like a leader. The worker asks, what's the minimum I can do? The leader asks, what's the most I can give? The worker focuses on tasks, the leader focuses on transformation. That choice defines not just your career, but your character. It determines whether you'll leave behind a checklist or a legacy. So, if you want to think like a leader, start where you are. You don't need a title. You don't need permission. You just need to care more than most. Care enough to take ownership. Care enough to ask better questions. Care enough to lift others, even when it's not convenient. Because leadership begins the moment you decide to stop waiting and start creating. It begins the moment you stop seeing yourself as an employee and start seeing yourself as a contributor to something meaningful. It begins the moment you realize that your influence isn't limited by your position, it's amplified by your mindset. Leadership thinking is the belief that your actions matter, that your words carry weight, and that your behavior sets a tone. It's the courage to stand for something when others stay silent. It's the discipline to show up consistently when motivation fades. Every organization, every team, every family needs people who think like this. People who lift others up, who take responsibility, who create trust. When more people think like leaders, the culture changes. People start collaborating instead of competing. They start focusing on progress instead of politics. They start seeing each other not as co-workers, but as co-creators. And that's the real magic of thinking like a leader. It multiplies. When one person takes ownership, others follow. When one person connects their work to purpose, others find meaning in theirs. When one person chooses courage over comfort, it gives everyone else permission to do the same. So, think like a leader, not a worker. See beyond the job and into the mission. Choose ownership over obedience, purpose over process, long-term vision over short-term comfort. Lead with empathy, not ego, with curiosity, not certainty, with service, not control. Because when you change the way you think, you change the way you work. And when you change the way you work, you change what's possible for yourself, for others, for the future. You don't have to wait to be called a leader to think like one. Start today. In the small moments, in the ordinary conversations, in the decisions no one sees. That's where leadership begins. And one day, you'll look back and realize you weren't just doing your job. You were building something that mattered. You were shaping people, shaping culture, shaping the future. That's the power of thinking like a leader. It doesn't just change how you work. It changes who you become. Leadership isn't about where you stand in the hierarchy. It's about how you see the world. Thinking like a leader is a mindset, not a title. It's the decision to step forward when others step back. It's the willingness to care when others only comply. It's the choice to find meaning in the ordinary and purpose in the work most people overlook. Most people go through life thinking like workers. They do what's asked, meet expectations, and follow the plan. Their focus is on getting things done, checking boxes, meeting deadlines, keeping up. And there's nothing wrong with that. But if you want to make an impact, if you want to create something that lasts, you have to shift from thinking like a worker to thinking like a leader. When you think like a leader, you don't just see your tasks, you see the ripple effect of your actions. You understand that what you do touches others, shapes their energy, influences their choices. You stop asking what's required of me and start asking what's possible because of me. That's the mindset that moves people, teams, and even entire organizations forward. Leaders think differently because they care differently. Workers think about getting through the day. Leaders think about making the day count. Workers look for instructions. Leaders look for improvement. A worker sees a job. A leader sees a mission. There's a story about a group of stonemasons asked what they were doing. One said, "I'm cutting stone." Another said, "I'm earning a living." But the third said, "I'm building a cathedral." The difference wasn't in the work, it was in the vision. They were all holding the same tools, but one of them held a purpose. That's leadership. Thinking, it's not what you do that defines you, it's how you see what you do. Thinking like a leader means seeing the why behind the what. It means connecting your daily actions to something meaningful. Because when you know why your work matters, the challenges become manageable, the effort becomes energizing, and the results become fulfilling. Purpose fuels persistence. And when you think like a leader, purpose is what drives you, not pressure. But this mindset isn't easy. Thinking like a leader means you stop hiding behind instructions. You stop saying, "That's not my job." You start taking responsibility even when it's inconvenient. You start making decisions that don't just serve you, they serve the mission, the team, the people who depend on you. Leaders don't wait for permission to take initiative. They see a gap and they fill it. They see a problem and they fix it. They see potential and they nurture it. It's not about doing more work. It's about owning the work that truly matters. When you think like a leader, you stop counting hours and start counting impact. And the truth is, leadership has nothing to do with authority. Some of the most powerful leaders don't have a title at all. They lead through example, through consistency, through compassion. People follow them not because they have to, but because they want to. Because leaders inspire trust, and trust is built, not given. Thinking like a leader requires a shift from control to connection. Workers focus on tasks, leaders focus on people. A leader knows that success isn't just about what gets done, it's about how people feel while they're doing it. When people feel safe, seen, and supported, they give more of themselves. They take ownership. They bring ideas. They care. And that's when the magic happens. Leadership is about creating that space, the space where people feel like their work matters, where they can take risks, make mistakes, and still be valued. Because great things don't come from fear, they come from trust. Thinking like a leader also means thinking long-term. It means resisting the temptation to chase immediate results at the expense of lasting progress. A worker focuses on finishing the project. A leader focuses on building something that will endure after the project is done. Leaders think in decades, not days. That long-term mindset changes how you respond to challenges. When something goes wrong, the worker says, "This isn't fair." The leader says, "What can we learn from this?" When the plan falls apart, the worker says, "I give up." The leader says, "We'll find another way." Leadership thinking transforms problems into possibilities. It turns frustration into focus. There's a kind of calmness that comes with thinking like a leader. It's the calm that says, I don't need to have all the answers right now. I just need to keep us moving forward. Leaders understand that uncertainty is part of progress. They don't let fear stop them. They let it shape them. Because leadership isn't about eliminating fear. It's about leading through it. When you think like a leader, you also stop needing validation. Workers often ask, will they notice my effort? Leaders ask, did I make a difference? One seeks approval, the other seeks impact. Approval fades quickly, but impact lasts. And here's the beautiful truth, anyone can think like a leader. You don't need years of experience or a big title, you just need to start thinking differently. It begins the moment you take ownership. The moment you stop waiting for someone else to solve the problem and decide to be the one who does. Leadership begins the moment you realize you are responsible for the energy you bring into the room, the way you greet people, the tone you use, the attitude you choose when things go wrong. All of it communicates who you are and what you stand for. And when you think like a leader, those small details become your greatest tools for influence. Leaders inspire through their example. They understand that people don't do what you tell them to do. They do what they see you do. If you show consistency, they'll learn commitment. If you show humility, they'll learn openness. If you show care, they'll learn to care too. Leadership thinking multiplies. It spreads through behavior, not instruction. That's why leadership isn't about perfection. It's about authenticity. Leaders don't need to be flawless. They need to be real. They admit when they don't know something. They ask for help. They show vulnerability. And by doing so, they create a culture where others feel safe to do the same. That's how trust is built, not through strength, but through honesty. Thinking like a leader means you stop competing with others and start collaborating with them. You stop asking, how can I look good? And start asking, how can we all win? Leadership isn't about being the best in the team. It's about bringing out the best in the team. It's realizing that your success means nothing if no one grows with you. When you think like a leader, you see people not as resources, but as relationships. You learn that everyone has something to contribute, and it's your job to bring it out of them. You learn to listen more than you speak, because leadership begins with understanding, not instruction. And perhaps the hardest part of thinking like a leader is letting go of ego. Workers say, I did it. Leaders say, we did it. Workers seek credit. Leaders share it. True leadership means being willing to celebrate others, even when you're the one who made it possible. It means trading recognition for respect. Because respect lasts longer. Leaders are remembered not for how much they achieved, but for how many people they lifted along the way. They create cultures where others rise, where potential is unlocked, where excellence becomes normal. They remind people that success isn't a competition, it's a contribution. When you start thinking like a leader, you realize your work isn't just about outcomes, it's about legacy. You're not just trying to finish projects, you're trying to build people. You're not just trying to reach goals, you're trying to shape a future. And every action, every word, every moment contributes to that legacy. Leadership isn't about grand gestures. It's about consistent ones. It's about showing up on time, keeping your promises, admitting your mistakes, giving credit where it's due, and always doing the right thing, even when no one's watching. That's what it means to think like a leader. It's not about the spotlight. It's about the standard. And here's the thing. Leadership doesn't just change your career. It changes your life. When you start thinking like a leader, you start thinking differently about everything. Your relationships, your challenges, your future. You stop reacting to life and start responding to it. You begin to see that every setback is preparing you for something greater. Because leadership isn't about power, it's about purpose. It's not about control, it's about contribution. It's not about getting ahead, it's about bringing others with you. The world doesn't need more people doing their jobs. It needs more people owning their purpose. It needs people who see what's broken and refuse to ignore it. People who stand up for what matters, even when it's hard. People who think like leaders, not workers. So, wherever you are, in whatever role you play, choose to think like a leader. See beyond the checklist. Find meaning in the mission. Lead with empathy. Take ownership. Play the long game. Because thinking like a leader doesn't just make you better at your work, it makes you better for the world. And when you look back years from now, you'll realize something powerful. You didn't just go to work every day. You built something bigger than yourself. You shaped lives. You made people believe in what they could become. That's what leaders do. They don't just build companies. They build people. They build belief. They build the future. So stop thinking like a worker. Start thinking like a leader. The world is waiting for you to take that step, not because you have to, but because you can. And once you do, you'll never see your work, your life, or yourself the same way again. Leadership is not a position you wait for. It's a mindset you grow into. Thinking like a leader doesn't require a corner office, a title, or a team reporting to you. It begins the moment you decide to see beyond your tasks and start seeing your purpose. It's the moment you realize that your work, no matter how ordinary it seems, can influence the lives of others. The difference between a worker and a leader isn't in what they do, but in how they think about what they do. A worker shows up to complete a job. A leader shows up to make a difference. The worker says, "What do I have to do today?" The leader asks, "What can I make possible today?" That shift, though subtle, changes everything. It changes how you show up, how you communicate, how you inspire others, and even how you feel about your own work. Thinking like a leader means caring about the bigger picture. Workers tend to focus on their responsibilities. Leaders focus on their impact. A worker finishes what's on the list. A leader questions if the list is even the right one. The leader is not satisfied with just doing what's expected. They seek to create what's needed. When you think like a leader, you don't just see your role, you see your ripple effect. You begin to understand that every decision, every conversation, every choice sends a message. The way you speak to a colleague, the way you handle pressure, the way you respond to failure, all of it tells people what kind of person you are and what kind of environment you're helping build. Leaders know this. Workers overlook it. The easiest thing in the world is to show up, do your job, and leave. The hardest thing is to show up and take ownership, not just of your tasks, but of the people and the purpose behind them. That's what separates those who make progress from those who simply move. Workers execute the plan. Leaders elevate it. Thinking like a leader means thinking beyond yourself. It means you measure success not just by what you achieve, but by who grows because of you. A true leader's goal isn't to shine the brightest, it's to make sure everyone else shines too. Because leadership isn't about being in charge, it's about taking care of those in your charge. And that takes courage. Courage to step up when no one else does. Courage to speak the truth even when it's unpopular. Courage to admit you're wrong. Courage to keep going when you have every reason to stop. Workers avoid discomfort. Leaders embrace it because they know that growth and comfort never coexist. Thinking like a leader also means thinking long term. Most people focus on the next deadline, the next project, the next quarter. Leaders think about the next decade. They plant seeds today knowing they may never see the full harvest. They build systems, habits, and cultures that outlast them. Because real leadership isn't about immediate recognition, it's about lasting contribution. When you think like a leader, you stop reacting and start responding. You don't get caught in the noise of urgency. You stay anchored to what's important. You understand that not every problem requires panic, and not every success requires celebration. Leadership thinking brings steadiness. It gives you the clarity to make decisions based on purpose, not pressure. But perhaps the most transformative part of thinking like a leader is realizing that leadership is not about control, it's about influence. Workers think about how to get things done. Leaders think about how to bring others along. They know that leadership doesn't mean forcing compliance. It means inspiring commitment. It's not about telling people what to do. It's about helping them see why it matters. That's why great leaders spend more time listening than talking. They don't just want obedience. They want understanding. They don't just want results. They want relationships. Because they know that trust is the foundation of everything. And trust isn't built in meetings or mission statements, it's built in moments. The moment you show up when someone needs you, the moment you admit your mistake, the moment you choose integrity over convenience, those small acts are the bricks that build trust. And trust is what makes leadership work. Workers see people as part of the process. Leaders see people as the purpose. When you think like a leader, you don't just manage people, you care about them. You don't see them as resources to be used, but as human beings with potential to be unlocked. You take the time to understand their fears, their dreams, their strengths, and their struggles. Because leadership isn't about getting the best out of people, it's about creating the conditions where their best naturally comes out. And that means creating safety. Psychological safety isn't a luxury, it's a leadership responsibility. When people feel safe to speak, to try, to fail, they grow. When they feel judged, ignored, or dismissed, they shrink. Workers often protect themselves. Leaders protect their people. Because they understand that progress only happens when people feel free to take risks. To think like a leader also means thinking beyond results. Leaders care about how results are achieved, not just that they are achieved. They know that shortcuts might win today but lose tomorrow. They hold themselves and others accountable to standards, not just statistics. They understand that integrity isn't a policy, it's a practice. And thinking like a leader means accepting that leadership is lonely sometimes. You will have to make hard choices. You will have to stand firm when it's easier to conform. You will have to hold the vision when others can't see it yet. But that's what leadership is, the willingness to go first so others can follow safely. Leaders don't crave attention, they crave progress. They don't want to be the loudest voice in the room, they want to make sure every voice is heard. They don't want to win arguments, they want to build alignment. And sometimes that means sacrificing personal comfort for collective growth. Thinking like a leader means embracing humility. It means acknowledging that you don't know everything and that the best ideas might not come from you. It's the willingness to say, I don't have all the answers, but I'm here to find them with you. That vulnerability is not weakness, it's strength. Because when leaders show they're human, it gives others permission to be human too. Workers often think in terms of me. Leaders always think in terms of we. The language you use reveals how you think. Workers say, I need this to get done. Leaders say, how can we make this better? Workers focus on ownership of tasks. Leaders focus on ownership of outcomes. One builds walls, the other builds bridges. And here's the truth. Every organization, every team, every community is filled with people who could lead, but many don't because they've convinced themselves they're just workers. They wait for someone else to take initiative, to give direction, to set the tone. But leadership doesn't wait for permission. It begins the moment you decide to care more. You don't need to be in charge to lead. You just need to start thinking differently about the role you play in the bigger picture. When you think like a leader, you understand that your work is part of something larger than yourself. You start connecting your daily actions to a greater purpose. You start making decisions based not on what's easiest, but on what's right. Thinking like a leader also changes how you see failure. Workers fear failure because they see it as an end. Leaders embrace failure because they see it as feedback. They understand that every mistake carries a lesson, and every setback builds resilience. Leaders don't run from failure, they reflect on it. They ask, what can this teach us? Because they know that growth often comes disguised as disappointment. The way leaders think about success is different too. Workers define success by personal achievement. Leaders define success by collective progress. They know they've succeeded when others around them succeed. When people feel valued, capable, and inspired. When the culture continues to thrive even when they're not around. That's real success, the kind that lasts. And it's important to remember, leadership is not about doing everything. It's about empowering others to do great things. When you think like a leader, you shift from being the hero of the story to being the guide. You don't need to have all the spotlight. You just need to make sure the light shines on everyone else too. So how do you start thinking like a leader? You begin by asking better questions. Instead of what do I need to do? Ask what does this make possible? Instead of who's to blame, ask what can we learn? Instead of how do I get ahead, ask how can I lift others? Those small changes in thought lead to massive changes in outcome. Thinking like a leader transforms the ordinary into the meaningful. It turns work into purpose. It turns co-workers into collaborators. It turns pressure into passion. Because when you start thinking like a leader, you stop living just to make a living, you start living to make an impact. And that's the real reward. It's not the title, the office, or the applause. It's the quiet knowing that you showed up with integrity, that you led with heart, that you made something better than you found it. It's the satisfaction of knowing that because you thought like a leader, someone else now believes they can too. That's how leadership spreads, not through authority, but through example. One person chooses to see differently, to act differently, to care differently, and soon others do too. That's how teams transform. That's how cultures change. That's how progress begins. So wherever you are, whether you're leading a team, managing a project, or simply showing up for another day's work, remember this. You don't need to wait to lead. You just need to choose to think like one. Because when you think like a leader, you don't just change how you work. You change how others work with you. You don't just build success, you build significance. And one day, when you look back, you'll realize the truth about leadership. It was never about being in charge. It was about being the kind of person people could trust, follow, and believe in. It was about thinking differently so others could live differently. That's what it means to think like a leader. It's not a position, it's a way of being. And it starts with a single choice. Today, I will not think like a worker. Today, I will think like a leader.